Hello and welcome back to Book Lust. I'm Nancy Pearl. My guest today at the Women's University Club in Seattle in front of a live studio audience is novelist Tara Conklin. Tara, thank you so much for coming by on this awful rainy day.
It's great to be here. It's good to have an excuse to get out of bed.
I know, right? Yes. So your new novel, The Last Romantics, is, as you say in the afterword to the book, it's not an autobiographical novel, but it is based on an experience that your family went through. Could you talk about what that was like for you? Because your first novel, The House Girl, didn't have that personal connection to you or your family or your life. So could you talk about the differences?
Yeah, sure. The original inspiration for The Last Romantics came about, it was about 10 years before I actually started writing the book, so it's about 15 years ago now. And it was this tragedy that happened within my family. And my dad is one of 6 kids, and it's kind of a big Irish Catholic family, lots of cousins and, big Thanksgiving dinners and that sort of thing. And when this tragedy happened, it was very unexpected and very shocking to everyone. And the impact of it really reverberated through the generations of the family. And over the sort of weeks and months after the event happened, as the truth of what had happened came out, I found myself really asking some big questions about family and love and responsibility and success and all of these kind of big picture questions that planted themselves in the back of my brain. And I didn't really think, oh, I'm going to write a novel about this. It was more of, oh my goodness, this is such a compelling situation. This is such a tragic situation, and there's so much to unpack about this, and I don't really know how to do it. So I just kind of filed it all away. And I just kind of had it in the back of my head for many years. And then after I finished writing The House Girl, my agent called me and said, "So Tara, what are you working on now?" At the time, I was working on a novel about zombies, which, yes, that's what my agent said too. And I hadn't gotten very far in it, but I had started, and I was quite sort of taken with the differences in the zombie cultures, and I was kind of geeking out on zombieism, and so I told my agent all of this, and she said, there was like a pause on the other end of the line, and she said, "Tara, are you working on anything else?" And so I told her about this idea. And it was a very nebulous idea at that point. And it was really based in the idea of siblings and sibling relationships. And I had always been really fascinated with sibling relationships and how they are kind of the only relationships that really you have over the entire course of your life. These people see you change and you see them change, and the relationships wax and wane. And I felt at that time that I had never read a novel that really did true justice to the complexity of those relationships and over time. And so I told Michelle all of this, and she said, "Tara, forget the zombies. Write that book." And it was, I started writing it and in a sort of exploratory way, in the way that I started the zombie book and several other novels that will probably never see the light of day. And so I wasn't really thinking about the impact on my family. I was just kind of trying to sort out if it was something that I could do and I wanted to do. But when I did sort of get to that point of, okay, this is going to be my next novel, then I started to get a little nervous.
Right.
Yeah. And I called my dad, and I talked to my dad about it, and I called my grandmother. my grandmother gave me her blessing. And at that point I thought, okay, I think this is going to be okay. But it was definitely, I mean, there's all sorts of things, and we can talk a lot about writing your second,
Right.
about the kind of the pressures of writing your second novel. And those were sort of compounded by the fact that I was using this nugget of personal history and family history for the inspiration for the book. So yeah, that's why it took 5 years.
Yeah, 5 years, that's a chunk of time.
Yeah.
Well, since I was going to ask you about the pressures of a second novel, because The House Girl was such a big success and was so loved by so many readers. And we put that pressure on ourselves, but yet it's also coming from the outside.
Yeah. I definitely felt it. And I felt the pressure not so much from the readers who had loved The House Girl, but from the readers who had not loved The House Girl. And the voice of Amazon 1-star reviews ringing in my head. And even more so, just the logistics of writing a second book are so different, because when you're writing your first, or at least in my instance, I wrote, you have to write the whole novel before anyone will look at it. So it's really this exercise of faith and passion and total obsession. I mean, there's no logic to writing your first novel, none. And that was how I did it. I mean, it was really just of a subject and characters that I felt deeply passionate about. And it almost didn't matter if it was going to get published or not. And certainly didn't matter if it was going to be a success or not. And then when all of that happened, it was great. And then, but with the second, my editor was so happy with me. You can sell your second novel on an idea and a few chapters, which is what I did. And I thought that was the greatest gig in the world. I was like, oh my, I've written a couple chapters and already they want to, like, because my editor is really wonderful, and I'm going to write 2 more books with her, and she's great. She's very supportive of me, and we're just on the same page about stuff. So, but it was very different because I felt like I had to check in with her. And the first draft that I handed in of this book, which I did not consider a first draft, she considered it a first draft. I then went back and wrote another full draft over. I mean, the first one took me about 1.5 years, and I handed it in, and on deadline,
And when you hand it in, don't you sort of think, wow, I'm done?
Yes, I'm done.
Right. She'll have a few little edits here and there.
Oh, no.
Right.
She said, this is a great first draft. And it's like, no, this is my book. This is it. This is the book. And then the second one was much, much longer, and it took me another probably 1.5 years. It was probably about 3.5 years into the whole writing process, and I handed it in again. And that book was probably twice the length of this one. And she said, we're getting there. And I went back, and it was just so unwieldy. At that point, the manuscript had gotten, it was a lot of about future generations. It went way back into the past. It was just too much. And I just pushed it all. I threw it in the garbage, and I opened up a brand new document, and I typed chapter 1, and I started all over again. And I realized as I was writing that third version that everything that I had done before, I mean, it is pain. Don't get me wrong. It was incredibly painful to do that. But it was the process that I needed to go through to find these characters and find the story and kind of cut through all of the voices in my head and my concerns about the family issues, and that was the process that I needed to go through, and then I wrote it fairly quickly, fairly quickly after 4 years.
One of the things that I was interested in The Last Romantics is that part of it is in the first person, and part of it is in what I would call a close third person, where you're just in the heads of the experiences of a limited number of characters. What made you choose that way of approaching these characters?
Well, I wanted to have a central narrator, but I also wanted all of the siblings to have their own kind of say in the story. And so Fiona, she's telling the story, Fiona Skinner, who is my protagonist, who's the youngest of the 4 siblings in the book. She is telling us the story from the future. She's 102 years old, and she is looking back on her life. And so given that she's a writer, that she is at the end of her life, she was very close to all her siblings, and she is sort of going through this process of looking at her life in retrospect. I just thought it would be okay. Like, I know it's a little bit, it's not following the rules, you know, but I thought, okay, she's telling this story, but it's okay for her to be in the heads of her siblings because she was so close to them, and it was what I wanted to do narratively.
Right.
So I felt, okay, I can justify it from a kind of reader's point of view, and this is what I want to do as a writer. So I just did it. Even though probably if I had taken it to a writing class, first year writing class or something, MFA, they'd say, you're messing with point of view too much. But
I mean, I didn't find it. I found it very easy. I didn't think it was. I thought it was different, but not bad different. I thought it was really interesting that you chose to do that, and I thought that it rounded out the book, which is about sibling relationships, as you say. It rounded out the book in a really lovely way that we get to know these characters from the inside, as it were.
Yeah, good. I mean, I for me personally, I often find books that are told strictly in first person, first person, a little bit, I don't know, I get a little bit claustrophobic with them. And so I wanted it to be more expansive. And because there's also such a span of time covered in the book, it just felt like it would make sense to open up the voice.
Well, the other question that I had, kind of a process question, is the framing for the book and how you decided to do that, because it opens with Fiona, as you said, 102, doing a poetry reading. And in 2079, I thought, oh my gosh. And then that's such a long time, but yet it'll be here before
I know,
some of us know it. And then it's framed at the end. The frame is closed at the end. So was that in all the different versions? How did you end up with that?
That came fairly late in the game. I wanted to have this, as I said, this kind of lifespan novel, family novel. But I also wanted to look at contemporary characters and sort of the problems specifically facing contemporary women with demands of family and profession and the gender dynamics of the siblings, like what's expected of the male versus what was expected of the sisters. And those are very modern issues. And so as I was writing, there's just this tension between having this kind of retrospective, backwards-looking point of view, but then having these contemporary characters. And it just wasn't working. It just wasn't all fitting together. And I remember literally having this aha, like a little light bulb going off. What if Fiona is speaking to us from the future? It seemed like I could have my cake and eat it too, Like I could have these very contemporary characters in this contemporary setting, but I could also have Fiona looking back on the whole scope of her life. And also I'd never read a book like that. And I just thought, oh God, that'll be fun to try. And so I tried it. And I ended up writing a lot more of the future sections and then really cutting it back for the purpose of the final novel.
One of the strongest parts of the novel, one of the reasons that I think I found this novel so interesting is that it starts off with a whole section about the breakdown that the mother has, which you've given a terrific name to, the pause, or the siblings have given it that name. And it seemed like such a, that you had such insight both into the mother and into the siblings. Was that an easy part of the book to write, if you can say any part of a book is easy to write?
Well, that part was only in the third version. It was not in those first two drafts that I submitted. And that was when I typed chapter 1, that's what I started with. And it really was a process. It was really sort of getting at what was the basis for these relationships. Right. And I remember I was workshopping one of the chapters, much well before this version. And I remember someone saying in the group, but why are these siblings so close? Like, why are they hanging out as adults? And I'm very close with my sisters. And I thought, because they're siblings, of course they're close. But of course that's not the case. I mean, people, those are often relationships that are very alienated.
That don't work out.
Yeah. So I felt like I really had to kind of go back and investigate why they were so close. And at the beginning, when I first started writing that, I wasn't even sure if it would end up in the final novel. I wasn't sure. I mean, I was doing it mainly just to kind of really get at the bonds between them. But then, yeah, I really loved that section.
Yeah,
and
it's a wonderful section.
I really felt for the children, both as a mother and as a former child, and I really felt for the mom to be sort of confronted with the situation. In the opening pages of the book, the sibling's father dies very suddenly, and the mother, who has never worked, she's taking care. She has 4 young children. And she learns that they have no money. That basically they don't have any money. So she has to sell her house, and she goes through a pretty deep depression and kind of shuts herself up in her bedroom for a number of years, depending on which sibling you ask.
Right, 2 or 3, depending.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you ever think now that because you're so close to your characters, I mean, an author gets very close to the people that she writes about. Do you ever feel like you want to go back and pick one of these siblings and explore more? Because I have to say, I'd really like to know more about Renee, who is the oldest sibling, who makes certain decisions and has been forced because of her mother's depression to kind of take on the mothering. So are you done?
I think I'm done. I mean, I got that question a lot too after the house girl.
Right.
I almost feel like I'm like they've earned the right to be left alone. I've been so nosy in their lives for all these years, and they can just kind of go on and do their own thing now. Who knows? Maybe I'll change my mind, but I do feel like I'm done with them. And also that was one of the reasons why I don't want to give away too much about the ending, but I really wanted an ending that ended and that was satisfying.
Right.
For me as a reader, and hopefully for readers, and the intention was definitely to put in it, to have the book end.
When you're writing, do you outline?
No.
Okay. Oh,
I wish that I did. Yeah, I wish that I did. I always I'm like, oh, maybe in the next one I'll outline and it'll be easier. I'm sure as you know, writers are either outliners or non-outliners.
Right. I am not
either. And because for me, the true joy of the process is to discover the story. And if I outline, it just kind of takes away the fun, or a large part of the fun for me. Usually what I do though, I write and then I go back and I outline so that I can kind of keep track of what has happened and see if I have like holes in plot or parts of the character that need to be fleshed out more. But I only do it after the fact.
Are you nervous? Like I would be terrified that I had 2 more books due.
Yeah.
Does that terrify you, or is that exhilarating, or both? I imagine it's both.
It's a little bit of both, mainly the first. I mean, as you know, I was a lawyer for
Right.
many years, and so this is still like, people want to read what I write. Like it's kind of it's really a dream to be able to do this, and I have a lot of ideas on my, stocked up, and my kids are in school now. I'm not at home changing diapers or anything. So I'm excited. And as I said, I love my editor and my agent. And I feel like the team that I've been lucky enough to work with at William Morrow is really terrific. And I know a lot of people have not had dream experiences with their editors or their publishers. So I feel very, very lucky that I have a great group of people that I work with.
So is the new book that you're working on zombie?
The zombies will come back, though. Just don't tell my agent.
When you look for something to read yourself, does it change while you're working on a book?
That's a great question. I know a lot of writers don't read in, like, if they're writing a literary fiction, they don't read literary fiction, or they'll just read poetry. I kind of still just keep reading everything. I find other writers very inspiring and very instructive, and to, just to see how somebody else figures out a plot, or to see how a character is developed. I mean, or even just a turn of phrase, how a sentence is constructed. And I don't have an MFA. I'm not a sort of traditionally trained writer, so that's my education. I mean, reading has always been, the way I learned how to write. So I just keep reading everything, even as I'm writing.
Were you a big reader as a child? Do you remember some of the books that you? That maybe
Little
you're
Women. I just went to see the new movie. That was a great movie. You guys should all go see it. Gosh, Tuck Everlasting, I remember, made me weep and weep and weep. I loved the Narnia books. I loved the Chronicles of Prydain, which don't get as much attention these days.
They don't.
But those books I loved. I also read a ton of Stephen King, like at really inappropriately young age. I was reading Carrie and Salem's Lot, and I was a big fan. I read a lot of fantasy books,
Right.
all of the McCaffrey, the dragon books, yeah.
The Dragon Riders of Pern.
Yes,
et cetera, et cetera.
yes,
Right,
those
right.
books. I loved those. And when I was really young, I read pretty much every single Nancy Drew ever written. I read a lot.
Was there a book that you read? I know you became a lawyer and you worked as a lawyer before you were writing full time. But was there a book that you read where you kind of said to yourself, "This is what I want to do"?
I kind of knew. I always wrote as a kid. I started keeping a journal very young, and I remember even in elementary school, teachers would compliment me on my writing, and it just seemed like something I could do, but not something to do as a job, and I certainly used my writing in every job that I had. It really helped me, and in school it really helped me. But I didn't really consider it a valid career goal, to
Right.
be. I did a lot of journalism in high school, and then when I went to college, I had some dear friends who were journalists, and they were so serious and they were so outgoing, and I was like, I'm not going to be a journalist. And that seemed to be the only, the only way to be a writer was to be a journalist, a nonfiction writer. To say you wanted to be a novelist was like saying you wanted to be a, I don't know, rock star. So it just seemed like totally off the charts, impossible. So I had this thing in the back of my head that I would write full time when I retired from my real job.
Well, somehow it would be easier. I was just thinking this, that it would be easier to say I want to be a poet than a novelist. Do you know what I mean? I mean, novelist, you just don't think about as that's what you can do to earn a living.
Yeah, I certainly, and I mean, I didn't know anyone who's doing it. And MFA, when I was going to graduate school, there weren't that many MFA programs. And the one person I knew who had an MFA was teaching high school English. And that seemed to be what you did with an MFA was teach. And I knew that I didn't want to be a teacher. I mean, I knew that I didn't want to be a high school English teacher. It was writing for me was something very personal and very private, and it just brought me a lot of joy and entertainment that I didn't really see a need to expand it until I started writing The House Girl, and then that project really kind of took over my brain.
And so what are you reading now?
I'm reading The Sympathizer.
Mm-hmm, The Sympathizer. Yes. We love Tan Nguyen.
Yeah, that book is really amazing. I just finished The Overstory by Richard Powers, which kind of blew my socks off.
Now, do you think you're going to go back and read any of his, or maybe you have already read?
I haven't. Yes, I do think I will go back and read.
Because Richard Powers is just a brilliant writer.
And he is a brilliant writer. And that book just really, I mean, there are very few books that sort of change the way you look at the world, but that one for me definitely did, particularly the natural world. Mm-hmm. And it's about trees for those who haven't read it. And I'm reading Lindy West's essays too right now, which are really hilarious. And she was just here in Seattle, and she's a great, great speaker, very inspiring and very speaks her mind. She's great.
Well, I think all of us as fans of The Last Romantics really hope that your new book takes fewer than 3 revisions.
So does my editor.
Tara, thank you so much for coming by today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Nancy.